Hello. This is a video about reversing lenses in order to do macros. There are a couple of ways of doing this. One of them involves taking a camera with a lens on it, taking a second lens and attaching it to the first one, but backwards. So here's the front of the lens, and I want this to fit onto there. Now they've both got filter threads. So if I get a device which has two threads on it, I can screw one side of it onto one lens and the other side of it onto the other lens, and I've now got this lens connected backwards onto the first one. There we go. We're looking at the back of that lens. So what happens if I have a look to see what we can see now? Turn on the light and turn on the camera. Now the first thing you can see is that there is a lot of vignetting there. In order for this to be usable with this particular setup, I have to zoom all the way out. Both of these are zoom lenses, by the way. It doesn't have to be like that, they just happen to be. Now this illustrates, I think, one of the points I've discovered about this technique is that exactly what works and what doesn't does depend upon the particular bits of equipment that you're using. And in this case, you have to use full zoom with the lens on the camera for this to work at all, at least with this lens. If I now go to full telephoto with this lens, we will see this coming into focus at, and it's about 4 millimeters across. And if I now go to wide angle and go in again, it's about 1.5 millimeters across. That puts some light on the scene, and there we go, it's about 1.5 millimeters across. And that was autofocus working, by the way. This lens is working in the normal way, so I'm getting autofocus. I can change the aperture on this lens if I want. This one is fully open. But notice how close this lens is to the subject. It's very difficult to get light onto it to focus, and also I could bend these around, but it's still difficult to get light into a small gap like that. So I'm not particularly keen on this particular configuration, but it does illustrate that it is possible to connect two lenses together, one of them backwards, and to see really some quite small things and take photographs of some quite small things if you can get close enough to them. And one of the things is this is very conveniently set up, so this is looking straight forward, but with a subject that's down here, and I want this at an angle, the bottom here is likely to hit the ground before I can get close enough to the subject. So that very short working distance is going to be a restriction, and one that I'm not particularly keen on. With other lenses, you may get a much better working distance. This is the only combination that I've tried. So that's one technique where you add one lens to another lens. The other way of doing it is to just use one lens. Now what I've got here is a Canon DSLR, the other camera was a Panasonic, and I have on here a kit lens, very common lens, 18 to 55. Turns out to be quite good for this particular purpose. So in normal circumstances, this is the right way around at the moment, and if I, there we go, if I focus as close as I can that's what it's like at wide angle, and if I go to narrow the angle, it's about what's that, 60 millimeters across is the closest I can get. If I go closer than that, it just won't focus. And if I was using manual focus, I couldn't get it properly in focus. So that's what it's like normally. Now in this case, what I want to do is to turn this lens around so that the front of it fits into the camera. So I've got an adapter here which is threaded, so it will go into the filter thread here. And what it's got at the other end is the same as what's normally on the back end of a lens. So it's got the same on both front and back, which means that I can put this on here. So I've now got this lens backwards on this camera. We turn it all on again and put a bit of light on the scene. Move in. There we go, and we're now looking at about 10 millimeters, and hold on, no, the furthest out we can go is, sorry about that, is about 21 millimeters, something like that, as opposed to, what was it, 60 or so, the right way round. And I can go into about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 millimeters. And I can get more magnification than that if I add some extension tubes. So, take the lens off with its adapter and put the extension tubes onto the camera and put this adapter back onto the extension tubes and turn it all on again. Put some light on the scene. And I think, where should we start? There, possibly, yep. Now I'm looking at what's that, 5, 6, 7, 8 millimeters? Yeah. And it will go into about 3 millimeters. So I've got more magnification there, and I can get a similar result by putting a teleconverter on instead of these extension tubes. Now that's all fine and dandy. I can take pictures at quite high magnifications now with this setup, and it's not expensive to do. Forget the extension tubes just for a moment. You may well have one of these lenses anyway. They do tend to come with the cameras. The adapter that you need costs a £5, something like that. So it's a pretty inexpensive way of getting into macro if you happen to have a camera like this with a kit lens. And it's not just Canon, you can do this with other makes as well, obviously. Although it does depend on being able to get the adapter with the right fitting for your particular make of camera. The disadvantage here, though, is that at this end you can see the electrical contacts that normally, when it's the other way around, would be in contact with the contacts on the camera, allowing the camera and the lens to talk to one another. They can't talk to one another now. This is done. The camera doesn't even know, if you see here, it's got 0, 0 instead of an aperture. It doesn't know what the aperture is. It doesn't know anything about this lens at all. It can't autofocus, and you can't change the aperture. I can dial an aperture change here, but it has no effect whatever. The way you can't change the aperture while this is attached to the camera in this way. In order to change the aperture, you have to take it off, turn it around, put it the right way round, change the aperture, hold down the depth preview button, depth of field preview button, and while you're holding that, this is a slightly tricky manoeuvre to do, and again, I don't know that I'd like to do this out in the field. While you're holding that preview button down, you have to disconnect the lens, turn it a bit, unlock it and turn it a bit, at which point the lens and the camera will stop talking to one another because the contacts are no longer where they should be. And at that stage, the aperture will remain as you set it. And you can then continue to take the camera off, take the lens off completely, turn it around, put it back, and carry on with the new aperture. I'm not sure I'd want to do that out in the field. You might, or I might prefer to use just one aperture on a particular day. The trouble is, as I showed in one of the other videos, that as you change magnification, the aperture changes. So whatever aperture you choose, some of the time it's probably going to be the wrong aperture. There is a solution for this, but it costs 10 times more than one of these does. It's something in the order of £50. And I don't know what makes of camera this is available for. I know it's available for the Canon, because a friend at talkphotography.co.uk, Bryn, thank you Bryn, lent this to me for me to have a play with. Got it today, and so I'm going to try and put this onto this rig, and you'll forgive me perhaps if it takes me a moment or two to do it, because I'm not familiar with it. I believe the first thing we need to do is to disconnect that, and there is, oh yes, we have to take off the connector that's on there and put a different one on, which is already on here. Yes, already on here. There we go. And this screws on. So we've now got a connection which will go into the camera. The other one goes at the other end, and it's got the, I don't know if you can see them, it's got the electrical contacts there. And if I can find the, there we go, that goes on there. So I plug this into, in this case, the extension tubes, and these are extension tubes which are smart, so they pass the electrical signals through. Not all extension tubes are. So now the camera can talk to, well, through the extension tubes to this bit of it, which then takes the signal to the other end, the wrong end of the lens. And so the camera now knows about the lens that it's got on it. And if I put some light on the scene, and let's have this, I'm not sure which way around this is at the moment, we'll soon find out. Where are we? Oh, there we go. Right, that's the maximum magnification, which is again about 3 millimeters. And if I can, there we go, that was autofocus working. And it knows what the aperture is. It's f14, and I can change that in the way that I normally do. So now I've got aperture change available and autofocus, and if we go back to the other end, I can change the magnification, so I'm now looking at, we're back to, what was it, 10 millimeters, something like that. And obviously it would work if I didn't have the extension tubes on. So that's a way of doing it. You've still got the issue, the business about if you want to take something at an angle, this can get in the way. I was playing with it earlier, and it does get in the way at the highest magnifications. But if we have a look now, if I put this to maximum magnification and move in, I don't know, I haven't measured it. I've got a feeling that may be slightly bigger than the previous rig we were looking at. And certainly I think when you go to less magnification, it goes back. We're now looking at a scene which is 10 millimeters across, which is roughly 2 to 1, and we've got quite a nice working distance there. I mean, that's okay. So there we are. You can reverse a lens on another lens, or you can reverse a lens into the camera or onto extension tubes or a teleconverter, and you can get a lot of magnification out of a kit lens, which, if you do it without this, gives you the potential for a fairly inexpensive way of having a go at some relatively high magnification macros, especially if you've got a set of extension tubes already. So there we are. That's it. Reverse lenses. That's all for now. Goodbye.